On the morning of June 6, 1944, 225 American Rangers climbed a 100-foot cliff on the Normandy coast under direct German fire. Using rope ladders, fired from rockets, and extendable fire truck ladders, borrowed from the London Fire Brigade, specifically because no standard military equipment could reach that high. Their objective was 6 German coastal guns, believed to be capable of hitting both Utah and Omaha beaches at once, a threat considered serious enough to justify one of the most dangerous single assignments of the entire invasion. When they finally fought their way to the top, the guns weren't there. What happened over the next 2 hours turned what some early reports dismissed as a wasted effort into one of the most quietly consequential achievements of the entire D-Day invasion. This is the story of Rudder's Rangers at Pointe du Hoc. Pointe du Hoc sat on a prominent, exposed headland roughly halfway between the 2 American landing beaches. Its overhanging 100-foot cliffs, believed to house 6 155mm guns with a range of 15 miles, enough to reach not just the beaches themselves, but the invasion fleet's transport ships sitting offshore, well beyond the range of the ship's own protective smoke and maneuvering. Allied planners considered it one of the most dangerous single defensive positions on the entire Norman coast, and the task of neutralizing it fell to the 2nd Ranger Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel James Earl Rudder, a 34-year-old officer who would end up personally developing much of the assault plan himself, rather than simply executing orders handed down from above. General Omar Bradley later wrote in his own memoir, A Soldier's Story, that no soldier under his command had ever been given a more difficult task than the one that fell to Rudder's men that morning. The Rangers trained for months on the cliffs of Cornwall and the Isle of Wight under a British commando officer who was, by background and reputation, an actual authority on scaling exactly this kind of terrain. Preparing for an assault, most of them didn't even know the specific target of until just weeks before the invasion itself. Studying sand tables and plaster models of a cliff most had never actually seen in person before the day they climbed it. The plan called for 3 separate elements, coordinated carefully enough on paper that any single element's failure had a fallback built into the next. Companies D, E, and F would land directly below Pointe du Hoc and scale the cliffs themselves. A separate company would land nearby to attack other gun positions from a different angle, covering a flank the main assault couldn't reach. And the bulk of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, along with the entire 5th Ranger Battalion under Lieutenant Colonel Max Schneider, would wait offshore in reserve, ready to follow Rudder's assault in if a signal flare confirmed the cliff scaling had actually succeeded, and ready, if no signal came in time, to land instead at Omaha Beach and attack Pointe du Hoc from the landward side as a fallback route to the same objective. Just before the invasion, the mission nearly changed commanders entirely, a piece of the story that rarely makes it into shorter retellings, but that shaped exactly who ended up leading the assault that day. The officer originally slated to lead the cliff assault, Major Cleveland Lytle, learned during a final briefing aboard ship that French resistance sources believed the guns had already been moved, and argued loudly, reportedly while drinking, that the entire mission was now unnecessary and effectively suicidal, a claim that, whatever its underlying accuracy, was exactly the wrong thing for a commanding officer to say out loud to men about to follow him into an assault. Rudder relieved him on the spot without hesitation, reasoning that no officer could convincingly lead men into an assault he had just publicly declared pointless, regardless of how the argument might later be judged with the benefit of hindsight. Lytle was reassigned to another Army division entirely, and later earned his own Distinguished Service Cross elsewhere in the campaign, a strange, almost forgotten footnote to a controversy that could have ended his entire career under different circumstances. Claims that later circulated, suggesting Rudder himself secretly knew the guns had already been moved and pressed ahead regardless, have been specifically and directly refuted by historians who've reviewed the planning records. There's no indication the officers overseeing the operation had any confirmed information questioning the gun's presence in the weeks immediately before the landing, and the final planning review conducted, just days before the crossing, shows no sign anyone involved doubted the guns were still exactly where intelligence had placed them. The approach to the cliffs went wrong almost from the start. Heavy seas and navigational errors delayed the landing craft by roughly 40 minutes past their planned arrival time. And the delay came at real cost. One landing craft carrying troops sank outright, drowning all but a single occupant. Another was swamped by the rough water. A supply craft went down entirely, and the crew of another had to throw its cargo overboard just to keep the boat afloat. German fire sank one of the amphibious trucks, carrying the extendable fire ladders that the Rangers had been counting on to shorten the climb. By the time the surviving Rangers finally reached the base of the cliffs at 10 minutes past 7 that morning, 40 minutes behind schedule and already under fire from German positions above, they'd already lost roughly half their intended landing strength to the sea and to German fire before a single man had started climbing. That 40-minute delay carried a second, larger consequence. The signal flare, meant to tell Schneider's waiting reinforcements that the cliff assault had succeeded, came too late for them to act on it, and the entire reserve force ended up landing at Omaha Beach instead, thrown directly into the desperate fighting already underway there, rather than reinforcing Pointe du Hoc, as planned, an accident of timing that, by some assessments, ended up helping avert an even worse disaster on Omaha itself. Even as it left Rudder's men at the point entirely on their own, with no realistic prospect of the reinforcements the original plan had promised them. Naval gunfire from the battleship USS Texas, the cruiser HMS Glasgow, and the destroyers USS Satterley and HMS Talibont pounded the cliff-top positions relentlessly as the Rangers began their climb. Using rocket-fired grapnels and ropes alongside the surviving fire ladders to work their way up the sheer rock face, while German defenders above threw grenades and fired down directly at the men climbing beneath them. Some Rangers pausing mid-climb to shelter in small niches carved into the cliff face itself, while others pushed straight on, regardless of what was coming down at them. It took roughly 10 minutes for the first Ranger to reach the top. Within about 25 minutes of landing, Rangers from companies D, E, and F had established a solid foothold on the cliff-top itself and begun fighting their way, position by position, toward the casemates believed to house the guns they'd come to destroy, clearing German machine gun nests and sniper positions one by one as they advanced across cratered, bomb-scarred ground, still smoking from the pre-invasion bombardment overhead. The casemates were empty. Sometime after earlier Allied bombing had damaged the position, German engineers had quietly relocated the actual 155mm guns roughly a mile south, replacing them in their fortified emplacements with large wooden decoys, shaped and positioned to fool aerial reconnaissance photography into believing the guns were still exactly where Allied planners expected to find them. A deception effective enough that months of careful photographic intelligence gathering had never caught it. For a stretch of time that morning, it looked as though one of the most dangerous and expensive single operations of the entire invasion had accomplished absolutely nothing at all. The men who'd just fought their way up a 100-foot cliff under direct fire, staring instead at empty concrete bunkers and painted wooden logs. The Rangers regrouped, cut the coastal road running behind the position to block German reinforcements from reaching the area, and sent out small patrols to search for wherever the real guns had actually gone, refusing to treat the discovery of empty casemates as the end of their mission. Around 9 o'clock that morning, a two-man patrol from Company D, moving cautiously and expecting more resistance than they actually found, First Sergeant Leonard Budd, Lomell, already wounded once on the beach that morning, and Staff Sergeant Jack Kuhn followed a set of wheel tracks, leading south from the empty casemates, and stumbled directly onto the answer. Camouflaged in a sunken lane roughly 250 yards south of the coastal highway, hidden well enough that no aerial photograph had ever revealed them, sat 5 of the 6 missing guns, ammunition stacked and ready beside them, already zeroed in on Utah Beach and apparently unguarded at that exact moment, despite a German infantry force of roughly 100 men gathered nearby, seemingly more concerned with the fighting closer to the coast than with the possibility that anyone might stumble onto their hidden battery from behind. With Kuhn covering him, Lomell went to work immediately, placing thermite grenades into the recoil mechanisms of two guns to fuse their critical components together beyond repair, then smashing the sights of a third gun with the butt of his own weapon once he ran out of thermite charges to properly disable it the same way. He and Kuhn then ran back toward American lines to retrieve more grenades and finish the job on the remaining weapons. By the time they returned, a separate Ranger patrol had already found the same position independently and finished disabling the remaining guns entirely. A nearby ammunition dump detonated in the process for good measure. The explosion, large enough that Lomell and Kuhn initially assumed a stray artillery shell, had simply hit the position while they were away. The sixth gun was never located at all, apparently pulled elsewhere for repairs before the invasion ever began. By 9 o'clock that morning, less than 2 hours after the first Ranger had set foot on the clifftop, the mission Bradley had called, one of the hardest of the entire invasion, was, in the most literal sense, already accomplished. The guns had been found and permanently disabled, the coastal road had been cut, and the position atop Pointe du Hoc was, however precariously, in American hands, held by a force already reduced well below its original strength. Rudder sent word back to the fleet by signal lamp and homing pigeon, relayed through the destroyer satellite. Mission accomplished, he reported, but ammunition and reinforcements were urgently needed, and casualties were already mounting fast enough to worry him. The response that came back from General Clarence Hubner was not the one Rudder needed to hear. No reinforcements were available, since every Ranger who could be spared had already landed at Omaha Beach instead, exactly where the missed signal flare had sent them hours earlier, leaving Rudder's men to hold what they'd won with whatever they already had on hand. What followed was 2 days of genuine isolation. Cut off, outnumbered, and equipped with nothing heavier than 60mm mortars and automatic rifles, Rudder's Rangers held their small foothold against repeated German counterattacks, sniper fire, and artillery, reinforced only by a handful of misdropped 101st Airborne paratroopers who stumbled into their perimeter following the sound of gunfire, having no other way to find friendly forces after their own scattered night jump, and eventually a small relief force of 23 men who finally reached them the evening of D-Day itself. Full relief didn't arrive until June 8th, 2 full days after the initial landing, by which point the small American position atop the point had absorbed wave after wave of German attempts to dislodge it entirely. When the tally was finally taken, of the 225 Rangers who had made the original assault, roughly 135 had been killed, wounded, or gone missing, well over half the original force, a cost that early. Incomplete wartime reports mistakenly characterized as having been spent for essentially nothing, since the popular understanding at the time held that the mission had failed simply because the guns weren't where everyone expected them to be. That characterization was wrong, and it took years for the fuller picture to properly correct it in the public record. Britannica's own modern assessment states the matter plainly. Rudder's Rangers were the first American unit to fully accomplish its assigned D-Day objective, at a cost of roughly half their fighting strength, a fact that gets far less attention today than the dramatic image of men climbing a sheer cliff under fire. 10 Rangers were eventually awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for the assault on Pointe du Hoc, Rudder himself among them, recognition for an operation that, whatever confusion surrounded it in the immediate aftermath, had genuinely accomplished exactly what it set out to do. Lomell went on to fight again later that same year at Hill 400 during the brutal Battle of Hurtgen Forest, earning a Silver Star for a second act of battlefield initiative before the war finally ended, proving the instincts that had led him to the hidden guns at Pointe du Hoc weren't a one-time stroke of luck. He died in 2011, one of the last living links to a mission the historian Stephen Ambrose once described, in terms few historians would apply lightly, as placing Lomell alongside Eisenhower himself among the most consequential individual Americans of the entire invasion. An assessment that, whatever one makes of ranking individual soldiers against a 5-star general, reflects just how directly Lomell's actions that morning shaped the outcome of the wider battle unfolding on the beaches below him. Rudder went on, after the war, to become president of Texas A&M University, A long way from the cliffs, he'd once been told no officer should reasonably be expected to survive climbing under fire, let alone lead an entire battalion up successfully, spending the rest of his career shaping young minds rather than leading men into combat. If you want to hear the story of the broader fighting on Omaha Beach that Rudder's missed signal flare unexpectedly reinforced that same morning, when Schneider's diverted force found itself thrown into a battle that badly needed every extra man it could get, that's a story for another video. Let us know in the comments which forgotten battle we should cover next.